What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix for Week 3 of the 2021 CFL season. I'm Ryan Coop, and this time around, we're talking about the wide receivers for week number 3. If you missed, I already talked about the quarterbacks and the running backs. Those videos should have been out yesterday already, so make sure you go back, check those out to get your top options at those positions. But let's talk wide receivers, a position where in week 2, if you tried to spend a lot of money at this position, you were disappointed. A lot of big name options not putting up big point totals that you'd expect. And surprisingly, it was a lot of the value picks that actually led the way. So we'll see whether that evens out in week number 3, or maybe you can find some more great value plays. But for wide receivers, let's take a look at this from game to game, because I think it's easier to talk about, the best receiver options team by team based on kind of their offensive situation and their matchup. So let's start off with the first game of the week, the BC Lions and the Edmonton Elks. There's 2 options here in this game I really like, and they both come from the BC Lions, and it starts off with arguably one of the best receivers in the CFL, and that's Burnham. $11,065 in CFL Fantasy. So he is, I believe, the top priced option for this week, with Brandon Banks out on a bye week. But what has Burnham done through 2 weeks? 22.2 points against the Riders, 16.1 against the Stampeders in week number 2. So he's been averaging 19 points. He's always going to be featured in that offense. He's always a threat to score a touchdown, get his fair share of targets. And when he gets targeted, he makes the catches. So he plays the Elks this week, who I think, a couple players on Montreal managed to put up decent point totals against in week number 2. So I think there's some room there for Burnham. The concern is his salary going to be worth it at $11,065? And I think it will be. I think, Michael Riley is looking healthier. He's actually practicing this week, which is an encouraging sign. So I think, Burnham's been his go-to target for the last year and a bit out there in BC. So I expect a big day from Brian Burnham again. And I also expect a big day from Lucky Whitehead. I was cautiously optimistic on him in weeks 1 and 2 because he seems like the type of guy that, with a quarterback like Riley who likes to throw the ball deep, that Lucky Whitehead's going to be a great option with the speed he has. But I don't think you need to be cautious on him anymore. Granted, it's only 2 weeks through the season, but $7,120, 24.6 points in week 1 against Saskatchewan. I believe that was the top receiver total for the week. 17.9 against Calgary in week number 2. So he has a 21.25 point average through 2 games for a $7,000 salary. And again, always a threat to score a touchdown or to pick up a big gain. I like Lucky Whitehead for week number 3 as well. Options I'm considering, cautiously optimistic. They're not locks to go in my lineup, but I'm not necessarily staying away from them. A couple of other guys out in BC, Kumar Jordan and Dominic Rimes. This is mostly just because I think I want to see them get more heavily involved in the offense. Kumar Jordan, 11.1 and 10.9 in the first 2 weeks. That's not bad. That's a 10-point floor. You like to see that, certainly. But he hasn't had that big game yet I'm looking for the potential from, I think. So, that 15 to 20-point range at least. So I'm cautiously optimistic there. Same thing with Dominic Rimes. 13.6 in week 1 against the Riders, 1.9 in week 2 against Calgary only. So his targets kind of dropped off in week number 2, so I'm cautious on him. I'm hesitant to go and put that $6,316 in my lineup, just because with all the other great options, I don't know if he's going to get his share of targets. That's going to make that. So he might, and he could have a big day, or he could have a replication of what he did in week 2, which is not get the ball very much. So cautious on those two guys. And in Edmonton, I'm cautious on Darrell Walker. I think he's one of the best receivers in the league. He can put up a huge point total for you. He comes in at $7,231. Has been averaging 15.2 points through 2 games of the season. And he plays the BC Lions defense, which is part of the reason I'm staying away from him, because they shut the Stampeders offense down pretty well in week 2. In the latter half of the game in week 1, they shut the Riders defense down pretty well. So I think they could shut down a struggling Edmonton passing game that really hasn't gotten much going. They haven't found the end zone yet, besides a garbage time pass to Shai Ross in week 2. So of all the Edmonton receivers, Darrell Walker is the one I feel most comfortable with because he's had the most usage in that offense so far at the receiver position. But, I think you have to be cautious on him just because of the struggles the Elks offense has had. Is he going to be able to put up that big game this week against the Lions? I think so, but it's not as much of a lock as a Burnham or a Lucky Whitehead is to me. And options from this game I'm staying away from. Most other Edmonton receivers, I think, they have so many that they're going to seemingly spread the ball around if they're going to get things going. Maybe you don't know which one's going to take and have the big game. And through 2 weeks, you maybe thought Greg Ellenson would have a big game. You maybe thought Armonte Edwards would have a big game. After all, they're kind of the remaining 2 of the big 3 with Darrell Walker, but both have salaries over $7,000. Greg Ellingson averaging around 5.5 points a game. Armonte Edwards averaging just over 4. So that's not the production you're looking for from those guys. And if you pay that much of a salary when there's other options available to you and you don't get that production, it kind of stings a little bit. So I'm staying away from those 2 until I see them actually get heavily used and the offense starts succeeding again, I think is the play there. Getting into the second game of the week, the Montreal Alouettes and Calgary Stampeders. There's no locks here for me. No go-to options I'm definitely putting in my lineup. And that's for 2 very different reasons for these 2 different teams. For the Alouettes, I like all the receiver options there. I like BJ Cunningham. I like Eugene Lewis. I like Quan Bray, Jake Weineke. Heck, I even like Mario Alford, who's in the return game after a big return he had the week before. But I'm cautious on these guys because we've seen them play 1 game and we don't know, we can't derive from that who's going to be the go-to receiver for the Alouettes and put you up that big game. In week 2, their first game of the season, it was BJ Cunningham. He puts up 19.6, has a big day, a couple catches and a touchdown. Jake Weineke picks up a touchdown in week number 2 as well, 11.2 points. But then you have Eugene Lewis, who's normally one of your top options, only puts up 8.3. Quan Bray had his fair share of good games in 2019, only puts up 4 points. So it all really depends who's going to get the touchdown, I think, a lot of times for the Alouettes, and I think that's hard to predict through 1 week of the season. You look at Jake Weineke and look back at his point totals from 2019. The games where he put up big point totals was when he had the touchdown. He wasn't necessarily a big yardage guy week in and week out. And so I think Montreal is going to keep spreading the ball around, so it's going to be hard to determine which receiver to put in your lineup. I really like BJ Cunningham as an option, $6,242. If I had to pick one of these 4 receivers, I think I'd probably go with him, just because he was the one with the biggest week in week 1. He was always, when he was healthy, a huge factor in Montreal's offense. So I would lean that way maybe if you're looking to put a Montreal receiver in your lineup. But I think I'm just cautious on not knowing which one's going to have the big game and which one's going to lose some targets as a result of that. So not a lock to put any of those in the lineup this week for me. And on the Calgary side of things, honestly, I'm staying away from every Calgary receiver for week 3. you have Kumar Jordan's put up an average of just under 15 points, but every other receiver has put up less than 10, less than 8.5 even. Josh Huff, Markeith Ambles, Hergy Mayala, the big three other ones there, I would say. Disappointing weeks for Calgary's offense so far, and that's with Beau Levi Mitchell at the helm. Now, Mitchell, to his credit, played entire week 2 on a broken fibula, which is absolutely insane to me. I don't even understand how that's possible. But that definitely leaned into the struggles where he just wasn't connecting in the passing game. And now all of a sudden he's on the 6-game injured list. Now you have Michael O'Connor, a rookie quarterback, coming in. We don't know what to expect out of him. Granted, Calgary typically has pretty darn good luck when it comes to rookie quarterbacks stepping into a game and succeeding. Right, Beau Levi Mitchell? I still remember when he first took over as the starter in Calgary, and I remember his successful start very well. So there's the potential he could have a great game and these receivers could put you up points, but they haven't shown anything through 2 weeks so far. Kumar Jordan did have, a big 19.5 point week in week 1. 9.8 is not bad in week 2, but he comes at $10,246. And if you're spending that much money, I want guaranteed points coming out of that. What I feel is going to be guaranteed points. And the unknowns of Calgary's receivers right now, and the way Montreal shut down Trevor Harris in that offense from Edmonton in week 2, I'm staying away from the Stampeders this week at wide receiver. Jordan would be my best option out of them, I think, but again, that price total makes it hard to justify. And for the other 3 I mentioned, middling prices, anywhere between $5,000 or $6,000 and, $3,500 in that range is kind of where you're at. And you could pick up some points if they get the targets and they get the yardage, but the unknowns at quarterback, the unknowns for Calgary as a whole, scares me away from any Stampeders receivers in week number 3. Getting into the third game of the week, here's one where I think you have a lot of fantasy options. It's the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the Toronto Argonauts in a rematch from the week before. I think there are so many great fantasy options in this matchup that I think I will have at least, probably 1 or 2 in my lineup. Options I like, for me, it starts at Kenny Lawler for the Bombers, $6,228, 22.9 points, 20.7 in week number 2 against this Argos team that they are facing again this week. 10 catches, 99 yards for him, a great week. He seems to be the go-to receiver for the Bombers offense, and he's getting the targets all his way. In week 1, he had a couple touchdowns. In week 2, he was targeted in the end zone for another touchdown that went for an interception. So Collaros is looking his way near the end zone. So I like the chance that Lawler puts you up a touchdown on any given week. He didn't in week 2, but if he doesn't get the touchdown, he's still going to get the targets. He's still going to get the yardage. Lawler, to me, seems like a very safe pick. He's got a pretty high floor for you and a pretty high ceiling. So he's one of my go-to, out of all matchups this week, probably one of my go-to options at wide receiver. I also like Nick Dempsky for a lot of the same reasons. A bit less, 12 points in week 1 against Hamilton, 21.4 against Toronto in week 2. Dempsky, I think, it's so great to see this guy get his due, get involved in the offense and be, given the ball and given the opportunity to shine. And I think he's done that through 2 weeks. A great catch on the touchdown that he put up in week number 2. I think he's one of the go-to options for the Bombers at wide receiver. Behind Kenny Lawler, Nick Dempsky would be the next one for me. So I like that option as well. The only hesitation there or on either of these guys is it looks like Darvin Adams is starting to practice this week. And he was a full participant in practice yesterday, I believe. And so he could be ready to go and slot back into the lineup potentially. And if he does, I like Adams as an option. Him and Collaros in 2019, in the couple games they played together, found a pretty good connection. In I think the 4 games they played together, Adams had 2 games over 90 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. He was a big factor in some of those playoff games, particularly, I believe it was a long touchdown against Calgary that Collaros found him for. And in his time as a Bomber, he's had that ability to take on the big targets. He's been that touchdown threat. I like Adams as an option if he's in the lineup in week number 2. And maybe then I'm shying away a little more from a guy like Dempsky. I think with Adams in the lineup, it's still safe to say Lawler's getting his fair share of targets as well. But maybe, some that would go Dempsky's way go towards Darvin Adams. So check the depth charts on that one, I would say, and the injury reports on that one. But I really like Kenny Lawler, and I do like those other 2 options in Adams and Dempsky as well. Daniel Braverman from Toronto is a great value pick to me for week number 3. $2,500 salary at the bare minimum, and he's averaging 13.15 points through 2 weeks of the season. Put up 10.9 against Calgary, 15.4 against the Bombers. A surprise factor in that Toronto offense. 5 catches in week number 1, 8 catches in week number 2. He also picks up return yards, which is a great addition. That's always going to get you a couple of points. I don't think he'll get a ton of returner points against the Bombers. They have pretty good kick coverage. They did shut him down pretty well in that regard in week number 2. But he should be a go-to option if this keeps up for the Argos offense. And with Jawan Breskison going down due to injury last week, that should mean there's even more of an opportunity for Braverman to get a couple more targets in there. There's always the worry that things are going to course correct. They're going to start going back to guys like Eric Rogers, Ricky Collins Jr. more heavily, and that's going to take some targets away from Braverman. But heck, for $2,500, if he can get you, 5 catches again, I like that value play to save some money and put up some point totals there. Guys I'm cautiously optimistic on in this matchup, the aforementioned Rogers and Collins Jr. I think Eric Rogers, he's averaged 10.2 points through 2 weeks. Nothing spectacular in either week, 9.9 and 10.5. He comes at $8,260, so he's the higher priced option of wide receivers. But this is a guy who put up 10 touchdowns in 2019. He was a go-to receiver looking in the end zone for Ryan Dinwiddie, was part of that Calgary coaching system on offense. And it looks like Nick Arbuckle is probably going to start this week, I would assume. Still yet to be officially announced, but you have to think Arbuckle's coming in and trying to get something going on offensively. It's very tempting for him to lean on a guy he's familiar with from Calgary, a guy he targeted in the end zone many times in Calgary last season. So I like the potential of Rogers putting up a touchdown if Toronto can actually, get some point totals on the board against the Bomber defense that's not really giving up a whole lot of touchdowns right now, just 1 in each game so far this season. So I like Rogers in that regard. I also like Ricky Collins Jr., 18.6 in week 1 against Calgary, just 6.8 in week 2 against the Bombers. I think he only had 1 catch or 2 catches and some return yards there. So I expect that to be kind of more of a middling performance between those two, a bit of a bounce back week for Collins Jr. I think he'll get a couple more targets his way than he did in week number 1 or in week number 2. And I think Toronto they leaned heavily on the run game in week 2. They leaned heavily on the pass game in week 1. I expect it to be more of a combo of both, with Arbuckle at the helm for the full game if he is to start. So, cautiously optimistic on those two. Also cautiously optimistic on Rasheed Bailey, $3,485 for the Bombers. Just 4.5 points against Hamilton in week 1, but he picks up his first career touchdown in week 2 against Toronto and puts up 15.7 points there. I think he has the opportunity this year to make more of a name for himself in Winnipeg's offense. especially with Collaros being more of a passing quarterback and more of a passing offense than what we've seen in the past from Winnipeg. The caution there is, only 4.5 points in week number 1. His stats were very much helped by that touchdown in week 2. And, is he going to get the targets again this week, or with the other options ahead of him, especially if Darvin Adams comes back into the lineup? So cautionary on Rasheed Bailey, but I do like that option there. And then a couple guys I'm just staying away from in this matchup. Davaris Daniels for the Toronto Argonauts, to me, has not shown a whole lot through 2 weeks of the season. I think I talked about this last week already. He's a guy that, to me, can be a game breaker, but more often than not, if he's not having a fantastic game, you're going to get a lower end performance, maybe 1 or 2 catches for a couple of yards, which he's had through 2 weeks. So until he starts putting that up consistently, I don't think I'm taking a chance on Davaris Daniels. And then the other one is Drew Walatarsky of the Bombers, $3,709. I only put him on as a stay away on this list, to me, because I think there might be temptation to go with him as a value play after he, got a couple more targets his direction in week number 2. But I think he put up 9.5 points in that game, just 2.3 in week 1 against Hamilton. I think 10 points is pretty much the ceiling on Walatarsky to me. I don't think he gets a lot of catches each week. And in 2019, the only couple weeks he was over 10 points was the rare ones where he got a touchdown, which was 2 or 3 weeks. So if he's not getting the touchdowns his way, he's not putting you up a point total, that's worth it. And so I think the ceiling is pretty capped. I would say around 10 points. I don't think he has a high floor. So I'm saying stay away from Walatarsky, because I think there's better options in those price ranges that you can go with for week number 3. And finally, getting into the final game of the week, the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Ottawa Red Blacks. 2 clear options at wide receiver for me. No Shaq Evans this week. He's out on the 6-game injured list with an injured foot, which means a guy who's already produced very well so far through 2 games and in 2019 should get even more targets his way, and that's Kyran Moore of the Riders, $8,382, 16.9 points against BC, 16.1 against Hamilton in week 2. If he's putting you up 16 points as a floor, that's pretty good. He's got touchdowns in back-to-back weeks to start the season. Cody Fajardo is going to look his way when they come near the end zone. And I think he'll get a more heavy dose of targets in week number 2 to make up for what would normally go Shaq Evans' way as well. I think they'll lean on him a little bit to break through that Ottawa defense that had a very good week 1 and shut down the Elks. The other one is value play, Braden Lenius of the Riders. I talked him up through the first 2 weeks of the season, and he's lived up to the hype. 11.5 points in week 1, 11.2 in week number 2. 1 touchdown through the 2 games, got some, good targets for 5-6 targets for 50-60 yards in week number 2. He should get more of a bulk load as well through with Shaq Evans out. So I really like the low salary on that one. I like him becoming a more featured receiver for the Riders. They were high on him in training camp. They seem to really like what he did in the offseason to get in game shape this year. And they're rewarding him with the ball coming his way, and he's making the plays when he gets it. So I love Kyran Moore and Braden Lenius as options for week number 3. Other ones I like, but maybe I'm staying away from a little bit. Also come from the Riders, Jordan Williams Lambert, $4,049, and Mitchell Picton at $2,500. I like these guys. I just like the options of Moore and Lenius as a little bit more. Nice pun there, a little bit more. Williams Lambert, he's not that super cheap value play at over $4,000. 10.9 points in week 1, 5.3 in week 2. So I think he can be hit and miss. I think he could get you over 10 points this week, given, again, Evans being out. Maybe they lean more heavily on him. He has the potential for that, but I think he also has the potential for a lot of games under 10 points. So, given that, Lenius is so much cheaper and I think should get the same production level, if not more than Williams Lambert, I like that option better. And same thing with Mitchell Picton. This one was, I was struggling to decide where to put him in here. 6.6 week 1, 10.3 in week 2. He gets his first career touchdown in week number 2 against the Ticats. So he's been averaging 8.5 points a game. That's not bad. But he has yet to, really have I like Lenius better. He has a higher floor, I think, a higher average. If Picton can get more regularly involved in that offense, that's great to see. But really, I don't know if you could go wrong with with any of these 4 options. But definitely, if I had to pick, I feel pretty strongly about big weeks from Kyran Moore and Braden Lenius in week number 3. And finally, the options to stay away from. Sorry, Ottawa fans, but I'm saying stay away from any Red Blacks receiver in week 3. We saw that offense do nothing in week 1. They put up 70 passing yards in a 60-minute football game, which is a dismal performance by the offense. The only guy who gave you more than 10 points in that game was Ryan Davis at $2,500, which is an interesting value play potentially there. If that is a sign of things to come in terms of targets and usage for him. But you got RJ Harris at $6,350. He put up a disappointing 4 points in week 1. I'm not wasting a high price of my CFL fantasy money on the potential for Harris to bounce back this week. Devonte Deadman's the only very interesting one to me because he comes in at $3,650. He is primarily used in the return game. He put up 6.4 points just on returns alone against Edmonton. Could he do the same against the Riders? Could he put up more points in returns? And will he finally get used properly in that offense is an interesting thing to me. So maybe that's, if I had to pick an Ottawa player here at receiver, maybe that's a direction I would look. But until we see what they're going to do in week 3, week 4, etc., I don't think I can justify sticking a single Ottawa receiver in my lineup. I think there are so many better options at the higher prices, at the lower prices that we've talked through on all the other teams already, that to me it's just not worth it to take a chance on a receiver that may not put you up points if your offense is not going to pass the ball or put up the passing yards in week 3. So those are kind of the matchup. Those are the matchups this week. Those are the options I'm looking at wide receiver. I think there's some great options in each game and some clear-cut good options this week that hopefully land for you, and definitely some potential hit or miss ones as well. So that's the options at wide receiver. Again, if you've missed it already, go check out my top options at quarterback, at running back, and stay tuned for later today when I'll have my options out for defense, the best defensive options for week number 3, and then also stay tuned tomorrow. I'll have we should have the first couple depth charts and some injury reports out, and I'll give an update on those here as well. Just so that, you have all the info for the week of CFL Fantasy to help you lock in your lineups before the first game, which takes place Thursday night. That does it for this edition of the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix. Make sure you do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you liked, what you didn't, so I can improve this content throughout the season. And come back later today and find out which defenses you should put in your lineup for week 3 of CFL Fantasy. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Bye.